Hello everyone, this is class number 3 of nuk309, and this time I don't have any exciting PowerPoint presentation to show you. We have a lot of work to do, so let's just get to the business. So I'm picking up exactly where we stopped last week, and first let's clean up this stuff here. This is the old temporary extraction that we did. We really don't need it here anymore. Now, as you remember, last week we looked at the bit of noise that we have from the IBK extraction over here generally. And one way to reduce that is to cheat the background that goes through the IBK and make it darker, or at least make the blacks darker. So if we add a grade node here where the background goes into the IBK, we can go to the lift and basically go down. And as you can see, we can control the color of the noise over here. Let's see here too, it's helping a little bit. Yeah, and you want to look at the brighter parts and see that you're not destroying anything nice that you had. Let's go to where she's in focus and turn it off and on. And actually, it's helping because it's getting us a little bit more hair detail in there that kind of got lost before. It might be a little too hard edgy at this point, but we'll see it again with edge blur. So let's keep it like this for now and see what we get later on. We can always turn it off. Now, as you remember, I asked you to create a mat for her, a soft mat around one of the girls so we can separate them. I have a roto here, and it's very rough, and it's tracked to the track, so it moves with her. And so one thing we want to do is try and help those edge blurred, those defocused edges. And let's look at her when she's out of focus. And you can see, you know, the way they look right now. We want to make them feel a bit more integral and out of focus. And for this, we can use an edge blur. And it's a great tool. It's a great little node that I use a lot, because you can not only control the softness of the edges, you can also use it to control the color or luminosity of the edges. So let's add an edge blur right before the IBK goes over the background. And for now, it's going to be applied to both of them. Of course, we want to separate. So the edge blur is now set to 3. You can see it doing its thing on the noisy edges there. Now remember that we're working on a 3K image, so values for blur should go higher than you'd think, because really this goes by pixels. Let's set it for 20, and you see how nicely it's now softening her hair and making it look more out of focus. Of course, now it's hitting this girl, which we don't want to, but we'll take care of it in a moment. Another thing we want to use the edge blur for is when she's out of focus, you can see that the edges of her hair feel too bright and a little too greenish maybe, and we can use the brightness and tint on the edge blur to kind of hit that. So if we reduce the brightness a little, it's hitting also the center here, but as I said before, we're going to use different extraction for that, so we really only want to look at the edges. We don't want to go too far, but this is kind of helping, and we can also control the tint, maybe take a little bit of green out of it to make it feel a bit more reddish. Not too much, something like this, and this is already helping. Now, if you look very closely, you'll see that we're starting to lose grain on the defocused, on the wherever we have the edge blur, and this is natural. I'll show you later on how you can put the grain back in, only in these areas. For now, this is pretty nice. So we have to animate this blur, because as she goes in focus with the rack focus, we want to reduce that to match. So let's go to frame 20, and we want to put a keyframe here for the size, and probably for whatever else we change. So that would be the tint and the brightness. And now let's go to frame 34, which is the end of our rack. And of course, now you can see she's all blurry at the edges. We want to reduce this back to, say, 3 to keep her nice and sharp. Let's try and putting these back to the original value, the tint and the brightness. So let's put this at 1, add a keyframe there. Let's put the tint at 1. And that's it. Now we want to do something similar for the other girl, so we need to split our comp or the edge blur to have another one for her. This is where the roto comes in handy. So let's add a key mix here, and the edge blur for the woman will go into the A because we have the roto for the A, and of course in a key mix, everything that goes into the A will be affected by the matte, and everything that's outside the matte will go into the B, and this is our B. And let's put another edge blur here. And it's a good idea to put some softness on this matte so we don't have anything weird happening. Let's put 20 in there. So for the other girl, we're going to start, of course, with an edge blur of 3, which is what we're having now. And you can see it affecting just a little bit there, just killing off some of that graininess. And that's good. We might need to make it a bit higher, but for now, let's keep it at 3. And of course, we want to put our keyframe at 20. And let's keyframe the size. Let's also keyframe the tint and the brightness if we will want to change those. And now let's go to frame 34. We want to put this to about 20 to get nice soft edges. And we might want to reduce the brightness slightly to get rid of some of those dark edges. And I think that is looking pretty nice like this. So there you go now. 2 different defocuses and 2 different edge blurs going on them. Okay, time to clear up the cache. Let's do that right now. Clear buffers. And let's go and create the core matte, and for that, of course, we want to use the prime matte. And this time we want to be really careful. We want to create a matte that's really, really sharp, black and white. So let's start by this. Let's see if we can swipe somewhere else, maybe around the center. Clean the BG noise. So it's kind of like what we already did. Now just we're trying to make it a bit more defined and cleaner. And again, I'm gammaing up to see all the little points there. We want to keep it as clean as possible, and I'll show you why in a moment. And this is of course going to be a very hard matte, but that's fine with us. A little bit more here. And now let's gamma down and do the same for the FG. And as we do that, it might bring back some back into the background, which is fine. Okay, let's gamma back to about the middle. See if we need to clean any BG. Yeah, there's a little bit here, a little bit there. Now, the reason we want this matte to be very, very accurate or precise is because we're really going to use it only to tell Nuke where to use the actual plate and not do any kind of over with the background. Basically, everything at the core, in the middle of these 2 girls or our subject or foreground should just be the plate, maybe with some dispill going on. And that's all. But for that, we want to shrink this matte quite a lot to keep the edges clean so that these will be used by the IBK. So if we add, let's say, an erode node here, and look at the alpha, and we start dilating down, you'll see that even the smallest tiny pixels that are black And really, it's even hard to tell. You see these little tiny little ones, like 1 pixel or half a pixel wide. When we start dilating, they become gigantic holes, and this is not good because these holes will show through. But since we did already a pretty clean prime matte, we can use, instead of the regular dilate, the erode dilate, which is much better for this. And this time it's a little confusing because instead of going minus, you want to go plus to erode it, but you see that the erosion is very clean, and on top of that we can blur the edges to get a nicer transition. How much to do really depends on what it looks like, so we now want to do this. We have our IBK with the background on top. We want to add a key mix here. Let's do that. And into the A channel, we basically want to plug in the plate. And into that, we want to plug our matte. Oh, for some reason, this edge blur got disconnected. Let's connect it again. Now, you can see that our matte is extending too much. Let's kill the key mix, and we see the IBK. It all looks nice. The matte is extending too much. We see the green, which we'll take care of in a moment, but that actually helps us to see how much we're using. And, you know, it depends on the areas, like over the where the edges are harder. Like here, it works kind of well. Over here, not too much. So we need to extend the erosion, maybe reduce the blur. Let's just do that until we are left with just the IBK at the top. So what we're doing is we're putting back the plate everywhere in the center, so you can see that without it, we had all kinds of issues with the IBK not being fully opaque, like here. And once we do that, we're filling in with the right color. However, it still feels a little greenish, and that's why we want to use the kill spill over the whole plate. In this case, we just want to make sure that we're not dispelling things that should actually be green or exaggerating the spill. So this is our channel that goes from the plate directly into the key mix. Let's add a kill spill there. Not here. Here. And let's just look at it and compare it to the plate. So what you want to make sure is that you're really killing only the green stuff and not anything else. And just by default, I mean, you have ways to tweak the spill and tweak the colors, but it seems pretty right to me because there is a little bit of green reflection going on her jacket, which we're removing. There is definitely some green on the skin tone, like if you look here or here, but it's very subtle, and that's why I like kill spill. It's not really changing a lot of the colors, just taking out the green. So I think that's right. Now let's look again at the whole thing, and that's without the spill suppression. You can see, for example, on that shoe that there's a little bit of that green hue, or on the everything that is natural, you can see it very easily, and that is helping. So now we have edges controlled by the IBK. Everything in the center is basically just a plate, and we're using the prime matte to define where we just use the plate. So this is the basic setup, and we managed to get a lot of detail in the extraction. We managed to deal with the changing focus levels and create a core. And from here on, it's basically treating specific edges and making everything look better. And the best way to do it is to render out and compare to the plate. See where you have noisy edges. For example, when I go back to her in defocus, I definitely feel that this edge right here feels too bright. So you have different ways to do it. I mean, you want to do a soft matte around it, a soft roto, and maybe put another IBK gizmo, connect it, and do a key mix between them. And for that area, tweak the IBK. For example, in the IBK, you can tweak the red weight and blue-green weight to darken or color correct the edges slightly. You just want to make sure that you don't do it over the whole thing, because you want to keep a consistency between the real plate and the IBK. So if you start tweaking too much, as you can see, you're going to get this. So this is where our real plate is. This is where the IBK takes over, and you definitely don't want to do that. And really, it's a matter of isolating specific areas with a soft roto, just like we did here, and tweaking them differently. Apart from that, I promised to show you adding grain back into the edge blur, and let's just look here, and you see that area, and that doesn't feel good and might pop up when you color grade or correct. So usually the way to do that, you want to take your edge blur and you want to output a channel, and you want to create a new channel or a new layer for that. So let's create new, we'll call it blur dot alpha, because we want to put that in the alpha channel, and we want to do the same here. So here we can just use the blur dot alpha. We want both of them, and we should be able to see that if we change to the blur. Now you can see it's catching a lot of stuff, and it's a bit confusing because the blur is very wide here, but it will probably be still useful. Let's go back to RGBA. So now we want to add another key mix, and we want to clone our grain, or let's copy it because we might want to tweak it slightly. So we don't want to clone it and put here. We don't want to go through the alpha because we're using the key mix as the alpha. And now we want to grab as our channel for the key mix the blur alpha. So mask channel would be blur alpha. And as you can see, we're adding back the grain into the blur. Now, it's also affecting a little bit what's going around there. This is natural because we're using a very soft matte, and the blur is also affecting all the noise in the IBK, but it's not going to make a huge difference, and it helps us really add back grain to those blurred edges, especially where they're really blurred. Like look here on that girl, you know, without adding that grain, we really have a weird kind of soft band. And you know, if it's too much, if you want to reduce it, just reduce the mix on the key mix to just get a little bit in there, something like this, or a little bit more, and that should work. Okay, so at this point you really want to render out a version and watch it in Hero, for example, because there will always be things that will jump out to you that you only see when it's in motion. So it's always a good idea to go ahead and render a version, look at it, make notes, and then go back and fix those things. Before you render, you want to just check that everything is okay. And when I'm looking at what I have so far, well, I'm seeing that our background goes out of frame on the sides, and this really shouldn't be the case because we know that we have a piece at the top, but there's something weird going on, and this must be related to bounding box. So if we go back to our reformat for the background, yeah, preserve bounding box is off. If we turn it on, then this is fixed. The other thing also related to bounding box, EXRs will actually render the whole bounding box, not just the viewable frame. So if you look at your end, the end of the comp, you see where the bounding box is. If you're rendering EXRs, they will actually include all this area. So what you want to do is add a reformat node right there at the end, just to constrain the bounding box. So this is ready to render. You can add a write node here, and don't forget to render linear just like you brought it in. We're talking about the EXRs, of course. If you want, you can also render an Avid DNX HD QuickTime through the vector field, through the color, but usually it's faster to just render it out of the rendered frame. So you want to first render the EXRs. So let's just do that and go to Hero. So if you remember in the first class, I said that we'll find some time during the course to take a look at some of the features of Hero. So this is a good opportunity to do that. And I want to talk especially about features that relate to Hero as a review tool, because these features also apply to the much cheaper, more affordable version, the Hero Player. So let's first create a sequence. And now we can bring in, let's start with our plate. So let's bring in the plate. And let me just clear the playback cache. And now we can drag the plate over. And as you see, Hero is caching pretty fast, I must say, pretty fast for this size of frame. The problem is that when you bring in more versions and you want to quickly jump between one version to the other, this caching speed might not be enough, and you'll have, it will stutter or stop. So you have the option of localization. So if you look in your preferences on the first tab, you can set a path for a localized folder. So if, like me, you have a solid state drive, but it's really small one, and you have your probably your system and your software installed on it, but you can't put all your work stuff in there. It's just too big. You put it on your regular drive. You can use the localize feature, which is similar to Nux, by the way, to temporarily localize files over there, and they will be read much faster. And then you can just clear it when you're done with it. So you set the path and you set the amount of space you want to allocate for the localized folder. And now let me turn down the cache again and clear the cache. Now we can select this clip and right click on it and go to localization policy and change it to always, and you see the orange bar that just went there. That means it was localized to the faster drive. And now if I play it again, you can see that the caching is almost real-time, almost 24 frames per second. And once you do that, it keeps there in the localized folder until you tell it to clear the folder. So now let's bring in the render we did. And we can localize it too. That will just make things faster. So let's do that. And now that it's localized too, we can just bring it and put it on top of our plate. Now, Hero is asking us about the frame count, because actually the plates were probably rendered straight from either from Hero or from the editing suite. So they are actually at 23.98 and we're rendering at 24. That's really not a big deal, so we can just say yes, okay. We probably also want to view, instead of timecode, just the frames. So if we take notes about things to do, we can always write down the frame number. And as you see, everything runs very smoothly now that it's localized to the solid state drive. And what you can do is select your top one, the render, and if you hit D, just like in Nuke, it will disable it or hide it, so you can quickly toggle between the two. That's just one way of doing things. And you see that as you do that, Hero is caching, but because they're on the solid state drive, it's almost real time. And eventually both will be cached, and that's it. So localization is a good idea when you want to speed up things, and it's even a better idea if you're actually working on a network, say you're working in a studio, because that's even slower. So that will allow you to temporarily localize all those files to your own computer and to your faster drive. So Hero, just like Nuke, lets you adjust your interface and save different layouts. And that's a good idea to do it right now, because we have a lots of windows and stuff here, but we want to see our main view as large as possible. So one thing you can do is float a panel. Let's float our whole timeline here. And we can scale it down and put it back, say here. Now we can lower this all the way down. We don't need this. and then we can bring this bar. So really we have a tiny little timeline here to work with, but we don't need to do much here. We're not editing, we're just reviewing, and the most things we need to do is like disable one layer and so forth. So now you can go into Window and Workspace, and you can save your workspace, give it a name. For example, I have my own workspace here called My Review. So that's a little bit like Nuke. All right, so let's now look at the renderer and kind of identify problems. So one thing I'm seeing, and it becomes clear when I jump back and forth with the plate, is the hair on this girl. And we might want to zoom in, and you see this dark band here that shouldn't be. So I think this is because the IBK here is a bit, is not dense enough, and our core mat is just not reaching all the way to there. So we push the core mat pretty hard inside so that it doesn't touch any of the hair and stuff. But in this specific area, we might want to push it back to cover this black hole in here. So it's a good idea at this stage to note things down and give yourself some frame ranges if it happens on specific frames. There is some stuff going on here, you can see. And then if I zoom in closer, I mean, it's not looking bad, but there are a few things. It feels a little too noisy. I also think that the grain on the background is too harsh. There's too much. I need to reduce that. The area here feels too noisy. And the other thing is that, you know, if you look at it, it almost feels like we're missing some hair stuff. And this is probably, we're not going to get it from either the IBK or any other green screen extractor. So we might want to augment this one way or another. Just feels like we're missing a lot of detail in there. What else? When she's out of focus, I really don't like the very bright edge on her hair, especially this side, but also here. If you look at the plate, it doesn't exist. This girl looks really good in focus, the hair detail and all that, so it's mainly fixing this. So it's this, the grain, the bright edges on the hair when she's out of focus, the noisiness, adding some detail here. So let's go back to Nuke. So here is a new version in Nuke where I kind of try to address all these issues. So first of all, the hair on this girl. And it's always a good idea when you work on a new version to bring in the previous version so you can A/B and compare. So here is the version we looked at with that dark band here, and here's the new version which looks better. You see other things happening too. I'll show you them in a moment. So basically this is our prime mat, and this is the original erode that we had, but that defines where we just used the plate and not the IBK. So I used another key mix here with a different erode that's a bit more open for the girl. Here is a roto that goes just around her head, these areas that we want to address, and also on the shirt of the other girl, because that had the similar problem. And it's tracked and it's blurred a little bit, and then basically we have two different, and maybe we need to make the blur a bit more. You can see the edge there. So now we have two different versions of erosions. This one I also animated depending on the frame, just to make it match better depending on the movement she does with her head. So that's without the key mix. We're back to this area, you know, black hole area where the core mat doesn't reach all the way to the end, and that's with adding a second erode key mixed using this this roto. So this is for this. Another change is the area over here. So this is our previous version. I mean, let's actually go to see when she's in focus. This is our previous version, and this is our new. And you can see that I added quite a lot more detail in here. Feels more natural. And again, this is basically a cheat or a trick to get a little bit of hair. So let's quickly go over it. Going back to the plate, you identify the channel that has the most contrast around the hair, and that would obviously be the green. It's usually the green channel on the green screen. So then you want to shuffle and just get that green channel. So now we have a black and white image that represents only the green channel. Now we want, of course, the hair to be bright and the background to be dark, so you invert everything. The difference between dark and white is not enough, so you want to grade it. Now, one thing you want to make sure you do is that you clamp both the blacks and the whites. And you know what, for this purpose, since we're adding it, we actually don't need to clamp the whites. It actually doesn't make a big difference. If you were multiplying, it would definitely want the whites to be clamped, and I'll go over one. Anyway, you can also see that I graded the original. Let's copy this here, for example, just to show you, and I'll reset this back to normal. So what we get is basically black and white, and I'll connect to this just to show you. So here's my background, and now I am actually plussing or adding that hair. And as you can see, I'm only using a smaller mix range. I'm not really putting it all the way to 1. And it's also animated. It's animated because once she's at the beginning, she's out of focus, this thing is not going to help us anymore. It's just going to make it look worse. So I animated it to appear during the rack focus. But the problem with this is, if we look at the whole thing, is that the color feels off, because really we're using a black and white, color or no color. So that's why in this grade I kept the same push and pull on the black point and white point to get the contrast that you want. You want the background to be totally black, so you don't want to get any noise in there, and you want everything, all the hair detail, to be as bright as you can. But in addition to that, I also colored it using just the gain to be much warmer, much redder. And let's reconnect this one, and now it feels more like an extension to her hair. And that gives us back some of the detail, even though it's not as sharp and clear as on the green screen. It's going to be really hard to get, especially with the grain, but it definitely helps us. So that's without. It feels almost like something weird is going on, and that's with. And of course, you want to constrain it only to this area. You definitely don't want to have this effect going on, for example, on this girl. Now we get a sort of a halo. So again, you use a tracked roto to define, and always blur those rotos, just this area. So here's another improvement on the other take. I also went and changed the grain. As you can see, the grain is heavier in the previous take, less heavy on this one. I think it works better. And the last thing I wanted to address, what we saw when we reviewed that take, was the kind of bright, kind of greenish edge around her when she's out of focus. If we look back at the older take, yeah, that feels a bit off. So one way to do that is to copy your IBK gizmo and put another one that's exactly the same copy and connect it to the color and to the plate and to the background the same way. Add a key mix here. Isolate just the area that you want to tweak, and in this IBK, you see here the red and blue weights are exactly 0.5. If you tweak those, you're going to change the color of the extraction and especially the edges. So if you look at this IBK, you see the difference in color. So let's go back here. So this IBK, I tweaked the red weight, took it down a lot more, and that basically controls the color of the edges. So even without using an edge blur, or because we already have an edge blur there and we can't use another one, it's not going to work, you can actually tweak it. So that's another thing you end up doing sometimes. You just copy your IBK, create another one, constrain to a certain area when you want to have different settings. Now, the key mix is animated because once she is in focus, we really don't need that other IBK because everything looks good on that edge. Okay, so we're back in Hero. I ran a new render with the changes, so we have a new version. And here's a nice little thing in Hero. If you right-click on the version we have, which is version 4, and you look for scan for versions, it's actually going to go through the folder, and here it tells you found 2 new versions because it also found an earlier version that we didn't even look at. And now, basically, if you have this selected and you hold Alt on Windows and you use the up and down arrows, you're going to be moving between the versions. And you can see the version number right here. I wish it would show it a little bit larger. I don't know how you can do that in Hero, but it's still there. And you can immediately see the differences. And as you play, you can toggle between the 2 versions and see what has been done. And that's great. And if you still want to toggle to the plate, you just use the D to go back to the plate. So that gives you an option, the way I set it up, to toggle between different versions and see the differences, and also toggle between all the versions and the plate, so you have always the reference there. So that's some of the reasons why I really like using Hero and Hero Player as a review tool. So this is it. The shot is not completely done. There are other little things to tweak, especially the area over here. And again, it has to do with the core matte. But you're getting the idea. You do the rough brushes, so to say, the big brush strokes at the beginning. You create an extraction that works for you, a core matte, set it all up, and then you render out. You identify the small problems, and you fix them by isolating certain areas and treating them. So this is it. This was our warm-up shot. And next week we're going to start with a big balcony shot, which is not going to be easy. Not that this one was very easy, but it's going to be much harder and much more interesting because we actually go and do a lot of things in 3D and use Maya and Arnold. So I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.